welcome to another episode on Design to Connect. As you might already know, Season 2 is all about connecting with diverse individuals from different backgrounds who are using design to make a positive impact, reduce inequalities, and contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And our today's guest is someone who is doing all of that. He's creating all those positive impacts. And he's, among many other things, the partner, public developer, and the founder of Stipo. He lives in Amsterdam, if I'm not wrong.
Yep,
and his name is
right.
Hans Karssenberg. Hi, Hans.
Hi.
How are you?
Very good. How are you?
Good too. Thank you for being with us today here. How's everything?
Thank you for having me.
Great.
Wonderful to be in this series.
Thank you. So before we start our conversation, I'm gonna just give a little introduction of who you are and what you do to our listeners, and then we can go on with the questions. So you love great places where people can meet. You love working with people of all kinds, interests, and disciplines, and you work on human scale area development, transformation, placemaking, the city at eye level, user-based streets, co-created visions and strategies, system change, and many, many other things. You are a partner, public developer, and the founder of Stipo, where along your team, you want to be involved in long-term development of cities, sharing knowledge and training courses. And your multidisciplinary team stands for strategic and innovative product development in an open source environment. You like to work both on a local, city, and regional level, and you're also involved in international exchange. You're also a board member of several foundations, which Placemaking Europe is one of them, that you're also a co-founder of. So really, really happy to have you here.
Thank you very much.
So just to start off, as I was going through your professional experience through your LinkedIn, I saw that it seemed to me that your love for cities and culture and public spaces was there from the very beginning of your career. So to start, I wanted to ask you about your journey and how this passion started. If there's something in your personal journey that you think has led you to where you are now, basically whatever you want to share about how you got where you are.
Yeah, I think these things tend to be very personal indeed. I grew up in my young years. I grew up in Amsterdam, and I always loved the city, although it was totally different Amsterdam than right now. And then when I was 6 years old, my parents abducted me to this new town somewhere outside of the city. Super boring, and I was really longing back for the vibe of the city very much. I think cities have a tendency to challenge you as a person, to make you walk on your toes in a good way, to have all kinds of diversity and offerings that are inspiring to you. So I really miss that. Luckily, I still had family in Amsterdam and came there regularly. And when I went to university, my first criterion was it should be in Amsterdam. So, which I'm very much connected to the city of Amsterdam, as you make up from this story. But I do love cities in general a lot, and I guess that's because yeah, it's a more challenging environment. It's a more diverse environment. It's a culturally richer environment, I find. So just in terms of the cultural offer, for instance, right? So that's I think that's my personal connection to cities. And you know, I became an urban planner more or less by chance, but maybe not if you listen to this story. And since I've been working as a professional on cities, you know, that it grows even so much more deeply, because you get to visit cities all over the Netherlands, internationally as well, and work with people everywhere. So I guess it hasn't stopped yet.
Okay. Thank you so much. And you talk a lot about human scale in different projects that you work on. And human scale has also been something that was like really important to me. Like any moment that I visit a new city and it is built in human scale, I got super excited. And my non-architect friends just look at me like, they're like, what are you talking about? But I just wanted to ask you, what is it about human scale and cities that are built in human scale that changes our experience and how we feel in a city? What are the elements of human scale that are affecting how we feel and experience in any specific city?
So I guess there's the more emotional answer to this and the more rational answer. The emotional answer being, of course, that just follow your gut feeling. I mean, everybody knows when they visit a new city and they are wandering around the streets and just all of a sudden you look to your right and you see this wonderful, wonderful street that you really want to be in, and you just decide to turn right. So that's the kind of gut feeling that we try to understand with, among others, the research program of the city at eye level, because we feel if we can get it past that initial gut feeling, then we can get more of that. It's just the streets that we and the places that we love as users of the city. The more rational and professional answer behind this for us is that with Stipo, we really started researching what are the characteristics of the parts of the cities that have been long-lasting through the past centuries, decades, because probably those areas are capable of telling us something about what we should do today. I think we're in an intriguing profession where we are creating a built environment that, if you get it right, it should be there 100, 200 years from now as well. Whereas in the meantime, society, the economy has a much shorter life cycle, right? They change much faster. So we're building a solid environment that should be capable of addressing all those different needs of the future generations to come, and also kind of the economy, the society that we don't know yet, that we can't plan for. So we started studying what are the characteristics of those neighborhoods that have been capable of constantly adapting to these changes, while not becoming a mess, not becoming a chaos, becoming still functioning very well, still being loved by the users through time, the whole time, and being able to adapt it to constant change. And I find, by the way, that kind of research is severely lacking from the whole field of sustainability. We're always focusing on the latest trend in sustainability, but we don't really learn from what the past is giving us. But we are not traditionalists, so we don't want to copy form, but we want to understand what are the mechanisms behind that gut feeling, the mechanisms behind that sustainable functioning. And that has led to a set of core values that we use as the fundament on our work. And we found that human scale, if people can connect to their environment, can connect to others in their environment, the social quality of the city, and of course also then the economic quality, so what we like to call the software, is one of those ingredients. If a city is very sterile, is very top-down planned, very large scale in the sense that you feel lost as a human being in the street, then people don't connect to their environment. They don't invest into it over the years and over the centuries and over the decades, and that's when cities become less sustainable. So a lot of we got started in the 90s, right, as a response to the terrible urban development happening in the 80s, wanting to provide an alternative for that. And a lot of those areas we're tearing down right now at this moment. We're transforming them, we're demolishing those buildings. So that's only 40 years later, 30 years later, and that's not very sustainable. So I guess that's the more professional answer to it. So we really like to see cities as the complete combination of social, physical, economic, human, basically.
Interesting, and that needs for us to add a little bit of flexibility when we are, like, especially building our urban environments and public spaces, as you were saying, that these spaces can change and be dynamic as our lives are. But right now everything is very static and solid. And I think
of course, if you just think back to the 80s, right? we didn't have the mobile phone yet. We didn't have internet yet. We weren't as globalized as we are today. We were still in the Cold War period. So the whole society was completely different. And that just, changed over the course of 30 years. And also the population of our cities drastically changed in the last 30 years. So that's just to show how fast that kind of change is going. And I think good cities have it in them, or good neighborhoods have it in them to be able to adapt to that kind of change, and still keep functioning well, being in the sense that the users of those areas, the people who work there, who live there, who visit there, are still loving them in each of those decades, are still appreciating them. So that's our ultimate aim, I guess, in the work we do.
Okay, and I think that kind of takes us to the meaning of place in a city. I remember the first time that I studied about the difference between a space and a place, and how these two different things a space can become a place. And I remember that I was really fascinated by it. I studied it, I think, the first year of bachelor, and it's still in my mind. And it was very interesting that the space can have identity and value and become a place that we have feelings attached to. So I wanted to first ask you, what are some maybe practical elements that can make a space or a piazza or a street to become a place, not to be only a passage that we pass through? How can we give that added value to our spaces and make them a place?
Yeah, maybe I can share some photos just to underpin that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I guess your recordings are followed by architects a lot, right? And designers.
Yes.
Probably a broader following as well. But when we work on projects, that we have the tendency to look at projects like this, right? And very often also from the bird's eye view, shown from the air. Proud projects. And this, by the way, is a project that we've recently been working on, which also illustrates that we're not necessarily against high-rise. There's good and bad ways to do high-rise, we feel, right, from the social perspective. So to begin with, we find that when it comes to high-rise, for instance, we are building more and more towers of loneliness. People are totally detached from public life, especially the higher up you are in your tower. It's more and more single households living in our cities. And there's no sense of community anymore. There's no sense of belonging anymore. So what we did here with the developer and the whole team, we more or less analyzed what could be 4 kinds of different communities who will live in this high-rise tower. And you more or less see it back in the design as well, right? You see these 4 compartments. And every segment has its own social amenities in it, right? So kind of build a village, but then a range of 4 villages, 4 vertical villages, for people to meet each other and really interact with each other and become a community. But this is only, of course, part of the story, because then for us, connecting to the city and the sense of place, this is the more important picture of the same development. So for us, it's very, very important. We very often discuss the skyline. For us, it's more important to discuss the eye line. What is happening at the eye level on the ground floor? And that very often in high-rise, we're not getting that right, because we have to put so many amenities for the tower in the ground floor that you very often have blank walls, have a disconnection from the tower. Like trying to have a conversation with somebody who's standing with their back to you, right? So, and then you don't really get a response. So the ground floor should be very open. It should connect to the surrounding networks of public space. And it should cater for amenities that allow people to meet, not just only from the building, but also from the surrounding communities. So this is a careful analysis that we made in this case. And I guess this shows that for us, the sense of place goes beyond just only the public space. It really is about do you feel at home? What is your experience as a pedestrian walking down the street? And then, as you see in this picture, the ground floor of a building, the first floors of buildings are a very crucial part of that. So that's why we like to talk about the city at eye level rather than the quality of public space, because municipalities, developers, designers tend to feel that public space is only the space that the municipality owns, whereas we really talk from the perspective of the total experience of the human being. So it's just one illustration, and maybe, yeah, I don't know how many examples you would like to have, but I can give a few more. Let me see. So nowadays, what we tend to get much more when we talk about this ground floor are these flat facades, right? So there's more and more standardization in the construction going on. We make a concrete structure and we kind of glue the glass panels to the facade on the spot. Easy to build, but quite terrible for the city at eye level. And you can see the thinking here. You can see that we need a transparent ground floor, so let's make glass from top to toe. But actually, glass from top to toe isn't all that transparent, right? So, and I guess this is something our ancestors knew. They made our ground floors like this. They made a 90-degree angle in the facade because they realized that this part of the glass surface is always mirroring the street. And if you're a shop owner and you're dependent on passers-by seeing your product and then stepping aside for your economy to function, you kind of need this 90-degree angle here, because this is really where you see the product. This is the part where you see the product, and it creates a little pocket place as well. So it's just a minor detail, but it shows how much it is about these human details in the way we look at our environments, the way we feel and listen to our environments, the experience that we have as human beings. And it also shows that how we totally forgot that, because this is what we get nowadays. I think I always said we have flat facade disease, right? Another thing is that where the most pedestrians are is always on the corner. So in the pre-war city, you always have the florist or the cafe or the bakery on the corner, and it's always because there you have 2 to 4 pedestrian flows catering for your shop. Whereas in this kind of construction, the door is always here because on the corner there's a concrete structure, and you can't do that anymore. So we lost a lot of that awareness that kind of our ancestors seem to have more by themselves. So one of the things we know from research is that our eyes are drawn to movement much more. Has to do with the fact that once these eyes evolved from amphibians, and amphibians can't even see still standing objects, whereas we can, because our eye makes the objects, we have tiny muscles that make our eyeballs tremble to make the still standing object move, and then our brains correct us for it. So super complicated process, but still our eyes are much more drawn to movement. And then what it means for the human scale is that if you translate this to design, and you make your streets very boring, very horizontally driven architecture, facade that disappears into nowhere. I can give an example just to show. So like this facade, then our eye gets bored. And this is the kind of street when we do a lot of street interviews with users about their experience, where users tend to say, I don't feel at home here, I want to walk away. We also measure how fast people walk, and people walk faster in streets like this, just they want to escape it. Jan Gale did research in these kinds of streets as well, and he noticed that people don't turn their heads as often, because you don't get drawn to the side. Whereas if you have a street like this that has much more variation, or this, where every 6 meters there's a new facade, a new reason to go in and out, a new smell, new sound, that's where our eyes get drawn to the side, where we slow down our pace, where we turn our heads much more and where we feel at home much more. And again, this is a quality we seem to have lost in the design, because we tend to create large urban blocks of 200 by 200 meters, developed by one developer, designed by one architect, and having the same facade all around. But if you're aware of this, you can also create those blocks, but then with more diversity in them. So we like to translate these lessons we learn to modern form, to new projects going on. And we could talk hours about this, because there's a lot of lessons we can learn from environmental psychology, for instance, urban psychology, about how we experience. And I guess that's what we're trying to do with the city at eye level, in order to get it right in the new places we create. So maybe I can give an example of that as well. Just a project we've been working on in the past couple of years. It's called Merwede in Utrecht. High density for especially for Dutch standards. It's a transformation area where there will be 6,000 new dwellings, 100,000 square meters of work and amenities. All organized around 10 new squares, 20 inner courtyards that are open to the public as well, one park, and 0 cars on the street. And why is this so important? Because high density is important for developers to make a business case in transformation areas, right? It's always more expensive to develop in transformation areas, so you want the developers to be able to make a profit, because otherwise nothing is happening. So then you you allow for high density. But the deal here is with the real estate developers. There's six combinations active in the area. Is that they are allowed high density and a better business case under the condition that they also invest into the quality of the city at eye level. And one of the rules you see here is derives from that way we look, is that you do have larger urban blocks, but they're split up in separate buildings. They're split up in separate entities, so that every 6 to 10 meters, there's a new facade, a new ground floor unit, a new reason to go inside and outside, and etc. And then we pay special attention to the social quality in this area, to the interaction between people, the quality of public space, and the city at eye level. And it's very much embedded into the rules of the master plan. And I guess it shows that you can also repeat these lessons from the past in modern day, new form, in new construction, and etc.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel it became much more clear for me. Thank you for explaining. Now I would like to ask you about the feeling of belonging and sense of community a little bit more, because I feel especially the feeling of belonging is still very I don't know how would that really look like when we are creating or designing the spaces. So as we are creating places that are lively and they're creating healthy environments, either in our public spaces or in the hybrid zones between the buildings and the public space, how would we now then add the feeling of belonging to those spaces? How could it really look like?
So I was just in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and maybe it's nice to share some examples from there. I guess in the post-war period, this has happened to a lot of our cities, right? Completely car-oriented public space. We tend to first design the buildings, and then whatever space we have left is what we call public space. Well, this is officially public space, but I guess we all feel that it's not a place, it's not I wouldn't have a sense of belonging here that much. And then people say, yeah, we don't like to walk in Malaysia. Well, I wouldn't like to walk in places like this, right? So this is not very appealing to walk. Whereas luckily, in every place you can always find the bad examples and the good examples. This is the ground floor of the Petronas Towers, the KLCC. Used to be one of the largest or the largest structure in the world, right? For some time. But more important than that skyline is how it connects to the public space and the park around it. So a lot of careful attention was put into making this connection, making it human scaled. And what you see here is that, the building isn't overwhelming. There's a base of about 4 stories, 5 stories. Before then jumping back, you would see the Petronas Towers. It's very much situated around water. We like water in warmer climates, and it becomes a very social place, right? Because I think if you want to understand if something is a public space or a place, is one of the observations you can try to make is how many people are there in groups. So not just users of the public space passing by individually, because that's when you have a transit space where people are walking from A to B, but really interacting with each other. So we always count the amount of groups, and I guess there's a lot of groups of people using this space. Food pouring into public space, becoming part of public life, creating this hybrid zone between private to public, super important. And then, in the Dutch context, so one of the perks of our profession is that we get to walk a lot, right? So we get to be outside, we get to observe a lot. This is in my own hometown, and this man, I love this man, the scene of this man reading a book in public space. And of course, after taking his picture, he asked me, why are you taking my picture? And then we got to talk, and he explained to me that he lives here on the ground floor. And he likes to be to himself very much, but every once in a while he wants to be part of public life, because otherwise he feels lonely. And then he said, yeah, I always bring a book, because otherwise I feel naked. I feel as if I'm intruding, but I already know I'm not going to read it, because the neighbors pass by, they walk their dogs, or they go to the grocery store, and you have a chat with each other. And this is what it boils down to for us, is the social quality of the physical space. Now we know from research that if you have this hybrid space, this like this meter and a half, 2 meters outside of the building, where you can place your own bench, put some pots, have a transition from public to private. That's where 80% of the spontaneous informal contacts in the neighborhood happen. So if you don't have that hybrid space, if you don't design that, you miss out on 80% of the spontaneous informal contacts. And that's really where it begins. You say hi to each other, you greet each other, you have a chat about the weather, or about the kids, about a pet that you may have, or something else. And from that, you can then build deeper relationships in your own environment. And then we know from research that, again, that people tend to feel happier, tend to feel more connected if they have more context in their own neighborhood. If people want to be, no matter where they live, in a small village or in a large city, I guess they also always want to be part of a community, part of the village, so to speak. And then you need a sense of place as a heart of the community. It can be a central town square, it can be a lake in front of Petronas Towers, or it can be this pocket place in your own residential neighborhood to interact with others and to meet with each other. So I guess that's one of the elements of how this attachment works, and why we find it so important to not just only have public space, but to really also have a lot of places. Not every public space has to be a place. Right? Not every some public spaces are just functional, or you can't make it lively, interactive, and vibrant everywhere. But in our plans, we always try to determine zones where it's going to be more peaceful and tranquil, and you also need spaces of contemplation. But you also need these kinds of places where really people feel at home, where they can have a picnic together on a warm summer day, where the kids can play outside, etc., etc. And then, of course, it taps into so many other values, because if you get this right, kids will play outside. And one of the major plagues in our cities right now is obesity. I've been working in a neighborhood recently, lower income neighborhood, where up to 70% of the kids are faced with obesity.
Oh, wow.
Because they don't play outside that much, because they don't participate in informal sports and etc. So that's really where it begins. Then to create an environment where you tempt people to walk, to cycle if the climate and the culture is there for cycling as well. To engage in jogging, in informal sports. Most important sports we do in the cities are not the organized sports, but the informal sports, right? To have such an environment that you're not condemned to sitting in the car the whole time. That creates a more healthy environment, and then when people are healthier, they also are happier again. So it's a very deep layered process of attachment. And I think there's one more thing about this to be said about this, and I really like this quote of Richard Sennett, who has said that cities need to be incomplete, because if they're incomplete, they invite the users to co-create, to put some plants and pots in front of their doors, to create a little garden, etc., etc. So we tend to design, especially in new areas, we tend to over-design areas, and I think this is a very challenging idea for municipalities, developers, as well as architects. Can you make an area that is incomplete? Do you get the assignment to create an area that is incomplete enough for the users to co-create them? Because if you can change something in your own environment, you can make it a little bit an extension of your living room. You can appropriate it. Then you will also feel more attached to it. Then it's your space, and then you will be inclined to invest into it more, and it will be functioning more sustainably over the decades and centuries as well. So for me, this is a very deep, layered process that right now through the City at Eye Level knowledge program we've been studying for about 15 years already, and the more you discover, the more you realize we don't know enough about this yet, unfortunately. So yeah.
Okay, that was really interesting. I think when I think about placemaking, I see creating lively and healthy places as one level. Then when we go deeper, we are able to create this feeling of belonging. And I think if we go a little bit deeper, maybe we can use these places as a way for community mobilization, for them to kind of become the protagonists, or the ones who are taking care of their own neighborhood. And I wanted to ask you, how much of that you think is a cultural thing, and how much of that can be done by designing of the spaces? Because I feel we a little bit lost the idea of neighborhood being a smaller entity of a bigger entity, that's the city.
Yeah.
Where the people who are living in that neighborhood could actually take care of the governance of that space.
Yeah,
and
of course.
If we could create like these plazas or these places within neighborhoods where the decisions of the neighborhood is taken care of there, where the main all those community things are decided there together with all the neighbors. How can we create that, and how much of that is changing the culture of people? Because right now I don't know any of my neighbors in the apartment that I'm living, and how much of that can be created by design.
So for us, it's really about the combination of hardware, which we would say is design, is the hard surface, the design of buildings, designs of public spaces, etc. In combination with the software, the users and the activities, what is there to do, what kind of interactions between groups can you organize, and etc. And then the third part of the triangle, what we like to call the orgware, because this doesn't happen overnight. You need kind of a coalition or a neighborhood committee or a group of active people to work on this, and very often a combination of resident influence or user influence combined with the more top-down, the municipal influence as well, because especially if we talk about public space and place, this is very much, so for us the opposite of top-down is not bottom-up, because you don't create a good city only bottom-up. But it's what we like to call middle-up-down, is for bottom-up and top-down to start working together, to open up to each other, to open up the urban system to allow people to take care of their own space. But then, of course, there's also certain responsibilities that you still need the municipality or the building owners for. So I always see this as a balanced combination. And yeah, I think you're completely right about the neighborhood level, in whichever way that works, right? Because everybody creates their own village in the city, who likes to create their own village. So it can be in your own neighborhood, can also be you're connected to a club where you all go, and then that's your village, right? That's where you know a lot of people, where you feel at home. So in a city, this can work in many different levels. But I think the interesting thing is that COVID gave us back the sense of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It was terrible in many ways. Of course, but it did give us back the sense of how important it is to have an environment where you can walk, where you can meet others, where you can help each other out, because people needed help, right? So with Placemaking Europe, we've made this manifesto about the after COVID city, learning from the deep learnings of COVID, and then translating that to how we would like to reconquer our neighborhoods and recreate places there. Now, in the more historic inner city parts that we built before the war, especially in Europe, we have the piazzas, we have the plazas, we have the squares, we have the parks. So in general, we have the interesting ground floor very often if you still have the old buildings. So very often that is more or less an environment where this comes naturally. However, in the post-war neighborhoods, it's not at all, right? And that's, for instance, why I like the Piazza Aperta program so much in Milan. Because that is very much a program about those post-war neighborhoods, about the neighborhoods where people need public space the most. And as a city, you can make an invitation and say, look, if you as a community would like to change a parking space into a public piazza, a small piazza aperta, an open up square, then we come by with some paint, with table tennis table, and with some standard furniture, quicker, lighter, cheaper, because then we can make the change fast. After a community says we would like this, then the municipality and the team come by like in a couple of months or even 1 month, and so the change really happens fast, which is important to build a trust with each other. You don't spend too much, because if it turns out to be a nightmare for the cars to be parked, then we can always reverse it. But if people decide to like it, then we can keep it later on, and then we can make it more permanent later. So I think this is a very good example of a combination of bottom up and top down, because this is a top down program that the municipality gives to the residents, says and challenges them back, come with your initiative. And they also sign a contract, right? You need to adopt the square and program it. And so it's really a process where you combine the top-down energy with the bottom-up energy. And Milan showed that in this way you can create 40 new piazzas in 3 years' time, which is an amazing achievement, right? So I think it's a very good illustration of how to turn spaces into places, because officially it was public space when people parked their cars there, but it wasn't a place. And now people appropriate much more, feel connected much more. And then if it's successful, you can always do a bigger, more expensive investment there. So we need much more cities to do that. We need much more cities to open up to these kinds of processes and design them together with the local communities in the neighborhoods, challenge them to come with their ideas, and then to work together on creating these places, I think.
True. And the moment that the city lets its citizens to participate, the community itself mobilizes. Like there's nothing that you have to push the community, but the community itself start to mobilize and
of course. And it's never easy. It's never free of conflicts, because people have conflicting interests, or people are afraid of change, or but that's also what I like about this approach of quicker, lighter, cheaper, the tactical urbanism, right? That you just do it quickly because and cheaply, because it may not look as nicely as the permanent intervention, but it does lower the threshold for people to say yes to it, because always the promise is there that if it doesn't work, we haven't spent too much money, we can always reverse it. If it does work, we have tested it out, take the elements that are successful and turn it into a more permanent design.
That's true, and it also gives the dynamism and flexibility that we were maybe talking about in the beginning of our talk, that yeah, our cities, our lives are changing very fast, but the cities are not made that flexible. So maybe this would be one of the elements that any city.
This is one of the secrets of adaptability. Yeah. Another one is, for instance, the ground floor. If the ground floor of a building is high enough, ideally 3.5, 4 meters high, then and you have a lot of smaller scale units feeding a street, then through time you will see, through the decades you will see, there's all kinds of different functions in there, and it allows the solid structure to provide an infrastructure in which the city can more or less breathe through time, right? It can adapt itself to whichever needs there are in the local economy 30, 40 years from now. We don't know what's going to be necessary then. So you need to create this kind of, within the solid structure, you need to create these flexible spaces and places. And then, of course, we know that if you develop an area with public space as the backbone, as the first thing you think of, then the area is strong enough to allow for the change to happening while it still keeps its character. You know, a good street, a good place is keeping the place together more or less through time and through all these changes. If you first design the buildings and then whatever space you have left over, like a picture I showed in the beginning, is what you call public space, then it doesn't work like that, because that's not very functioning as a backbone. It's the reverse way of thinking, and it's also what Jan Gehl is saying, right? The first life, then space, then buildings, and not the other way around. It never works. And also in the world of placemaking, you know, there's a lot of deep knowledge. William White, Jane Jacobs, the work of Fred Kent, Ethan Kent, throughout the world, to deepen the knowledge about how to get more place attachment, how do people connect to a place. And they would say it's not about to come back to your question. Sorry, it's a bit of a long answer, but what can designers do? I think we've discussed already a couple of elements, you know, that design really does make a difference. But the design should be there to facilitate the social activity premise. So the hardware shouldn't be an aim in itself. It should be there to facilitate the software. So I really like this idea of first life, then space, then buildings, because that really starts from the software. It starts from how will people live there? How will they interact with each other? What are going to be the vibrant places? So what are going to be the anchors of life that we need to connect? And then really from there, you can design the connections between the public spaces. And you can also do a lot in design to support the activities that happen in public space. For instance, when it comes to public space, very often we design public spaces with only 1 or 2 things to do. May look nice on the design, but nothing as much is really happening. We forget about the software. Those great places have maybe 20, 30, 40, up to 100 things to do. So we forget to think about this from the point of view, starting from the point of view of the activities and working with the community together to develop those activities. And then the design should support that. If people want to play ping pong, of course you need to design a ping pong table, right?
And I wanted to ask you if we are gonna look at this from maybe a bigger scale and think that our cities will develop these places that are lively and they are healthy for people, they have the feeling of belonging, and they are mobilizing the communities. You think what would the effect of that be on the resilience of the neighborhoods and cities? For example, let's say if another COVID was gonna come, if we are able to create these places, these kind of connections within a neighborhood level, you think, how would that then affect the resilience and social cohesion in neighborhoods within a city?
So I think we have to start from the people, really. The people themselves are much more resilient than we sometimes give them credit for. But it really helps if the design allows them to show that resilience, to work on that together, to meet each other, to interact with each other, etc. So I would really start from the software again, and then think about how the hardware and then the orgware can support that. The better networks you have in a neighborhood, the more resilient, of course, that neighborhood is. Because, so for instance, I've been working in a lower income neighborhood in a lot of social housing in the west of Amsterdam the past 3 years. A large migrant descendant population. We have a lot of Moroccan, Turkish migrants in the Netherlands, but nowadays, you know, you can find all the nationalities basically, of course, in all our cities. And this is a neighborhood where people may not have a big wallet, but they are super connected with each other because they help each other out. And you wouldn't see that on the outside, really only when you start walking in a neighborhood, when you start connecting with people, you start to talk with kind of the informal leaders of the community. That's when you find out that, or they will tell you how these social function. So I worked with this great guy called Ford Lekbier, and he told me that, yeah, my mom is from Morocco originally. I grew up here, but she would like to, if she passes away, she would like to be buried back home. I wouldn't know where to begin because I grew up here, but I know exactly who to go to in the neighborhood. So everybody has a function in the social fabric of the neighborhood, and I think that's the definition of resilience, right? They also told me that yeah, the neighborhood has been regenerating, or was regenerated by the housing corporation and municipality in the past 20 years already. 2/3 of it was done already. We helped to get the final 1/3 done. Wonderful, wonderful. Public space was redesigned, but in a very sterile way. So they all said, yeah, it's nice that we have newly designed public space, but it's space, it's not place. It's and we are so connected as a community that collaborative spirit, we want to see that more in the public space. We want to have informal places where we can barbecue together and where we can really meet each other and where we can sit down. And whereas there is a tendency to take away benches because we're afraid that young kids might hang out there and cause trouble. And if you don't have benches, then that's the first rule that William White showed us, that then nobody's going to stay longer in that place, because people do like to sit down, you know. So it comes down to those kinds of fundamentals, I think, on how to facilitate resilience more. And then in that neighborhood, in one of the blocks, they had organized a community garden. And people told me there's a waiting list for that, because people love to do gardening, work with their hands, connect with their neighbors. So there's the social values of that. But for a lot of people, it's also a way, an affordable way to get food. And once you realize that, then it taps into the essence of living a better life, of being resilient in the neighborhood. So once you learn that from the local culture, and then we asked them why is nobody really thinking of creating more of those community gardens? Shall we do that as a program? So in 3 years' time, we grew from 1 to 5 community gardens in the neighborhood, and it still has more potential to grow to, let's say, 10, 12 of those community gardens. So I think, you know, every neighborhood has different buttons to push on, but if you work with the local community, learn from them, you can get their initiatives on board and really work on these places together. I was working there from the municipal point of view. The housing corporations are there, which are NGOs in the Netherlands, renting out the social houses. They're kind of top down as well. But we connected really with the kind of the informal leaders of the community, the Mabark and the Biers and the Nadia Akhtaouz, who are there to work with the local community. They have been working with the local community for 10 years already, putting in their own free time, organizing activities, and etc. So they know what's happening in such a neighborhood, and there's a lot you can learn from them to facilitate this, I think. So that's the kind of middle up down process I'm talking about on the neighborhood level more.
And I know that you have answered this through the other questions, but I wanted to ask you again if you want to add to that. As architects, what are some elements that we could think about when designing buildings to help contribute to making places within cities?
Okay, so I can't repeat this enough. I love this quote by Angel. First life, then space, then buildings. What I see architects doing a lot is that they immediately dive into the building. Mm. First, you need to understand what is the life in the area that I'm going to work in. Like, walk around, go outside, talk to people. If you can't do it yourself because you don't have the assignment or you're not allowed by your office, hire an urban anthropologist to do it for you. And there's ways to get a deeper understanding of what's going on there, but the best thing, I think, and especially nowadays, because especially in Europe, you know, we don't do the greenfield development that much anymore. It's more and more densification and transformation in existing urban areas where people are living already. If you don't relate to that, then you just don't understand in which context you are developing your design, right? So I think the first task is to go out there, to talk to people, just walk and talk, connect, and find out what's happening, or find the people who can find it out for you. Then think about how the structure of public spaces would cater that, how they should be linked more, and then you can think about your building. Then when it comes to the building, I teach in, for instance, in architecture, fourth year grade in the Technical University of Delft. And very often I find, I love to do it, right? Because I think we need to talk with each other and exchange our experiences. But very often I find in the 4 years of studies, it's the first time architects are really aware, the young architects are really aware that with the buildings, they're also creating public spaces. Mm-hmm. And I think that should be in the curriculum much earlier already, because you do have an impact on public space. And if you don't realize that, then you're going to create these iconic buildings that may look nice from the air, but are terrible on the ground floor. We get so many of them. So on the ground floor, it's really about connecting it to the human skill, taking these lessons from the way we look, the diversity you want to create on the facade, small scale units, a lot happening, a lot of diversity, to not using glass from top to toe is a solution, and then think you're transparent, to really get this right, to really dive into it. So that's why with the City and I Level program, we created a list of all the criteria that you need to apply as a developer, designer, or municipality when you work on those places, and those you can embrace. So look them up as an architect, and there's more programs like this out in the world, right? Learn from the lessons of William White. I always think nobody should be allowed to work on public space or a building that feeds the public space unless they've read that book, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces by William White. Right? It's groundbreaking. It has a lot of lessons of the difference between a space and a place. So there is a lot of knowledge out there that you can use as an architect. And then try to be incomplete in your design, which is, I guess, a hard thing to do, because a client will never ask for an incomplete design, right? They would ask for a complete design, especially when it's a larger investor. They want to have a safe, controllable environment that is overseeable. But especially for those long-term owners, realize that the value you create on the long term by allowing the users to co-create is going to be much, much higher. So at the end of the day, it's going to be better for the investor as well. It's going to lead to a more steady property value in the area. So leave room for co-creation. Don't design everything, and work with the community to find out what that would be. Allow for this to happen over the decades after your design is finished as well. So that's where the orgware comes in. So those, for me, would be some of the lessons. And you know, and then we like to think it through more. We like to work on inclusive cities where, you know, you have a mix of people being able to live, being able to work. We tend to design ground floors only for cafes and supermarkets that can pay a high price. But we also need our manufacturers, we need our repair shops, we need our creatives and our local startups to be able to be there. So try to design also more affordable places in the ground floor. So that what we do try to embrace now in our projects is that we say, look, from residential, we know that about 30-40% should be affordable or middle class rent. We should do the same for the work places. We should have a certain percentage to be affordable, because not everybody can pay 220 euros a square meter a year. Some functions only can pay 90 euros per square meter a year, and you need to create the diversity as a developer and as a designer.
Thank you.
So just some of the lessons, and if you want to learn more, join our trainings, I would say.
Yeah, I should take the link and.
We have one coming up now, 12 to 14 June.
Oh, okay, that's great.
3-day training where we really go much deeper on this.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the link for registration. Also add it to the link of the podcast. It's been great really talking to you. I could listen to you forever. But I just wanted to wrap up by asking you about the role of citizens and how could people, regardless of their profession, either they're a designer, architect or not, how could they kind of advocate for placemaking within their city or be a part of it? And if there are initiatives in the cities that you are working on and people could join them, if you could tell their names or send me the links so I can add it and people can.
Well, I think the best thing to do is to join the network of Placemaking Europe, where we share those local initiatives. Really starts from the grassroots, bottom up, local community driven initiatives. And no, placemaking is not place branding. Placemaking is really local communities creating a community garden in a neighborhood that needs it the most, right? That's, I think, what real, genuine placemaking is, to create a heart of the community somewhere. And I guess every neighborhood would want to have a heart of the community. So that's for us what genuine placemaking is. We like to share a lot of those examples through Placemaking Europe and through the Placemaking Week Europe that we have once a year, where about 500 of the people active in the network join. And these are for part the kind of the bottom-up activists in all the countries, and you see people coming up everywhere right now. So there's really good momentum for this. But we also luckily see people working for municipalities and for real estate developers join, because we need them on board. And there's a lot of people working inside these organizations who also want to change this, who also want to open up this to this much more. So what we define as a placemaker is much broader than just only the bottom up. So you can be in the super top down organization and be a placemaker as well, right? Like the Piazza Aperta program is showing. One of my other hats is that I'm one of the initiators and board members of the Stopmakkersfonds, Placemaking Investment Fund. Sometimes we see these initiatives thrive in the temporary phase, and then they need to leave when the redevelopment of an area happens. We like to allow those initiatives to stay permanently by helping them to buy their land and building for them. And very often they do have a kind of a social enterprise income model, but they can't get a loan from a bank to buy land and buildings because, you know, they don't acknowledge them. So I think it's also important to build a new financial infrastructure to support these kinds of initiatives more, and to make them grow, scale up, and grow from temporary to permanent if they would like it themselves. We have a lot of beautiful cases out there as well. So, and you know, no matter which city you're in, we now know through the work of Placemaking Europe, there's always initiatives like these that you can find. People sometimes tend to say that, yeah, it doesn't happen in our culture, it doesn't happen in our city, but so far we found that everywhere we look, there are people taking these kinds of initiatives. And then it's important to learn from each other and to grow stronger from each other, because sometimes you feel lonely, you feel like you're the only crazy person doing this. And then it's nice to know that there's a whole family out there of people who also want to do this, both grassroots as well as in more institutional organizations.
Oh, Thank you. Thank you so much, Hans. This has been really great. I feel I did a whole master class
in 1 hour.
I feel,
Yeah.
thank you. Really, I'm speechless, really, from the amount of things I learned today.
We like to share because our aim is not to sell books. Our aim is that more people use this in the city. So if you go to our website, you can download all the City and Isle books for free. And we would encourage you to use it, to use this in your presentations, to use this in your work, because we need much more of this in our cities. I think we're still not there at all. There's more and more awareness, thankfully. But if you look at the new development, I think still 90% of what's being developed in Europe is not there at all, right? So we still need a lot of change. So, and we need all of us in there. So that's why I think initiatives like yours are so important to help spread the word and to hopefully inspire new people as well to work on this.
Hopefully it will. So yeah, you can check Hans' profile on LinkedIn and also check Placemaking Europe for more information. Thank you again, Hans, for today, and looking forward to the episode to be out. And
thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this platform. Thank you.